Hello, boys and girls. Welcome to Movie Goodness, where we examine life through cinema here on the KB Radio Network. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't recognize this intro music, I don't know what to tell you. This is none other than the greatest intro music theme song for a show of all time. It is the greatest. It has lived in infamy in the minds of boys and girls who are now men and women since 1992. It is the theme song to X-Men, the animated series, which came out in 1992. And we just wrapped up the first season of the revival of that series, which is currently on Disney Plus. X-Men 97. All 10 episodes are available for your enjoyment. And, I was so excited for this show. I have anticipated this since 1997 because I absolutely loved that series. Even though on the Fox network, when it originally aired, it was out of order. Out of order in more ways than one. It was Fox Kids or whatever it was at the time were out of order for releasing it like that. But it was out of order. You would get the Phoenix Saga Part 1, and then you'll get like 3 episodes that has nothing to do with it. Then their pickup in the X Mansion is destroyed, and you like, what happened to the X Mansion? It was just completely out of order. Thank God for Disney Plus. They have they've been dumped it on Disney Plus ever since the launch of that app streaming service, and it was all in order. And it was weird watching it over, because you got to see it in order, and it was like watching something new or watching it for the first time, should I say. But X-Men 97 has been a revelation. X-Men 97 has been premier TV watching. It has, made me go back to when I was a kid, back when I was 15, 16 years old when it first premiered. And sitting in front of the TV and every week anticipating the new episode. And I got that feeling yet again for these last 2 months, with this week-to-week release, because we've grown accustomed to the binge watching an entire season being dropped all at once. And that's all good. It has its place for certain shows. But for something like this was the perfect show to kind of get that nostalgia back of anticipating the next episode, because it was a lot to unpack every episode in this show. But so we're going to go over this show. I didn't do a week-to-week review of this series because sometimes when I do that, I don't really do it justice. I don't let the episode, simmer for a little bit. Let me chew on it for a while and really give my thoughts on it. And later on, when I listen back to it, I'm like, well, I really don't feel that way right now about certain episodes. I'm not too far off from what I said, but it isn't exactly what I said the first time. It's only happened a couple of times, but it infuriated me. And I was like, you know what? I'm not going to just throw a review out there, especially for something like this. So over here at the KB Radio Network, we decided we're going to do a season wrap up when the season wraps up. And it did this past Wednesday, May the 15th on Disney Plus. And I must say, I have been super surprised by this show's ability to continue the story, yet give us more, go more in depth that I guess they couldn't do back in the 90s. They tiptoed around a lot of things in the 90s. Like they didn't bring up Nazis and, genocides and stuff like that, because it was for kids. Even though if you ever read an X-Men comic, it was nothing kiddie about it. But, they toned it down for the animated series. And I get it, I understand. It was a little heavy for a 10-year-old to bear witness to the Holocaust through a cartoon. So I understand all that. But on this particular revival of the X-Men, they went all in. And I mean all in. And after I finished watching all 10 episodes of this first season of X-Men 97, the question came across my mind. Is Marvel back? Has the MCU gotten their groove back? Are they back on track after a couple of misfires as of late? I would say over the past 2, maybe 3 years, we've seen some misfires out of the MCU. And it was a lot of doubt, surrounding Kevin Feige and Marvel. And when this show came about, is this the show to save the MCU? And we'll touch in on that after we go over the episodes, but that's just a question I want you to mull over in your head, because it was something that had me scratching my head after I finished watching X-Men 97. But we'll get to that after. But let's get into the review, and we're going to go through every episode of this show, of this first season, and break it all down and give my final grade to the entire season. I'm not going to grade each and every episode. I'm just going to grade the entire season of X-Men 97 season 1. This show, as I said before, is the revival of X-Men animated series, which ran from 1992 to 1997, continuing the story of the X-Men who face new challenges following the loss of their leader, Professor X. X-Men 97 is produced by Marvel Studios via Marvel Animation, and with Bo DeMaio as head writer of the first 2 seasons. Yes, 2 seasons. We're definitely getting a second season, and they've already greenlit a third as well. So we got a lot more X-Men coming down the pipe. But I want to touch in on Bo DeMaio before we get deep into this review, because I want to get this all out in the open. I don't want to keep apologizing every time I bring up his name. I know he was fired 1 week before the premiere of X-Men 97. He was fired from Marvel. Nobody knows what he did. Marvel hasn't said anything. Bo DeMaio hasn't said anything, even though he's on Twitter after the release of every episode, and he's breaking it down, and he's giving props and stuff like that. He hasn't had a disparaging word towards Disney or Marvel or anybody associated. He just talks about the show that he worked on, and that's that. But as far as the reason why he was fired, nobody has said anything. I will say this: it was nothing, as far as what I've researched, it was nothing criminal. There was nothing of a sexual assault nature or such sexual harassment or anything like that, or coming to work drunk or anything. It was nothing like that. As far as what I read. Now, like I said, they haven't released anything, they haven't said anything, but it was nothing like that. But what I have read is that Bo DeMaio was basically an a-hole. So he was just hard to work with, very difficult to work with, and a lot of people just could not work with him at Marvel. And it was to the point where they just said enough was enough, and they fired him. Now, when it first happened, I was kind of worried about the show. I was like, well, maybe they saw the show and it was so bad they fired him or something. But that was immediately erased after the first 2 episodes, and I was like, well, that's not the problem. So what's the issue here? What was so bad that they fired this man right before? Like I said, it wouldn't have been a big thing if the show wasn't written so well. This was such a well-written show. And I'm not saying well-written cartoon. Notice what I'm saying. A well-written show. This is one of the best written shows I have seen in years. I don't care if it's live action, drama, comedy, action, cartoons, anime, whatever. This was the best written. I mean, to nail all of these characters, and there's a lot of characters in X-Men, and for every character to get their moments, to get their story, and for it to be paced as well as it is, and told in a understandable way, I guess that's the easy way to say it. It's amazing. It's amazing that they pulled this off. So I wanted to touch in on Bo DeMaio and the fact that he was fired, but I don't know what he did, but I do know what he did on his show, and it was phenomenal. And I just want to give him his flowers. Now it may come out later on that Marvel found out he was a serial killer. Hey, if that was the case, I'll come back on and apologize. But as it stands right now, I mean, the man did an excellent, excellent job on this show. And I don't know if the fences can be mended between him and Marvel, but man, as far as bringing him back, because Bo DeMaio showed that he really loves this property. He knows the X-Men inside and out. You got to for this show, and we're going to touch in on a lot of that when once we get into the reviews, and let's get into them right now. I'm pretty sure we're 11 minutes in, and I haven't mentioned one thing about the show yet, and I'm pretty sure all of you are hot. So let's get in to the 10 episodes of the first season of X-Men 97. And I've already reviewed the first 2 episodes when they dropped on March the 20th, which was my birthday, by the way. And I'm still accepting gifts, by the way, so I'm just throwing that out there. But yeah, I reviewed that. You can go back and listen to my review of the first 2 episodes of X-Men 97, which were entitled To Me, My X-Men, episode 1. And episode 2 was Mutant Liberation Begins. And those 2 episodes, in case you didn't hear them, I'll just quickly go through them. Episode 1 picks up 1 year after the events of the final episode of X-Men, the animated series, where Professor X was presumed dead after assassination attempt, but he went off-world. But he was presumed dead, and the X-Men, they continue on with their missions under the leadership of Cyclops, who is once again married to Jean Grey, and Jean Grey is pregnant right now at this point. And we have the introduction to Roberto da Casa, also known as Sunspot, in this episode. And he comes, I like how they did this in this episode, because his interest into the series was like a carbon copy of how Jubilee entered in the very first episode back in 1992, but with a little twist to it, and I thought that was very clever to do it that way. We also get just an amazing battle between the X-Men and the Sentinels and Master Mold. It was awesome. That was an awesome battle. Only at the end of that episode to find out that Professor X had bequeathed the School for Mutants and the X-Men to Magneto. And so that's how the show, or at least the episode, leaves you with that little cliffhanger. And we open episode 2 with Magneto beginning to save humans and mutants to show that he's a hero now. That he has somewhat reformed from his old ways, but the rest of the world doesn't feel that way. So the UN brings him in for a hearing and wants to question him about his past crimes and everything, all at the same time, where we get the Executioner, who is going to attempt an assassination on Magneto with a weapon that will strip mutants of their powers. So while Magneto is at the UN hearing, he has Storm, he has Cyclops with him, and Jean Grey and Wolverine and the rest of the X-Men are back at the mansion. And Jean Grey goes into labor as this attack happens at the UN. And so she goes into labor. Scott finds out, he rushes off to be with Jean, but he tells Storm to protect Magneto. And one thing leads to another. The Executioner gets a shot, or gets a clean shot at Magneto, takes the shot, and Storm jumps in front of the blast. And Storm is stripped of her powers. And that was a very powerful scene, no pun intended, when Storm was reaching out to try to feel the wind and feel the moisture in the air, and she couldn't, and she knew she lost her powers. It was heartbreaking. And Magneto got the UN to pretty much understand where he was coming from by the end of that episode. And so back at the hospital, we have a racist doctor who doesn't want to deliver the baby. of a mutant and all this here, and Jean asks Rogue to absorb the, or was it Cyclops? I think it was Cyclops. Asked Jean, Rogue, to absorb the doctor's ability so she can deliver the baby, and she does that, and they named the child Nathan Summers, who we all know, who read the comics, will eventually become Cable, and Cable will play a part later on in this season. And just when you think that was it, the humdinger of the of a cliffhanger, in every episode pretty much had a cliffhanger, and it was fire. But this cliffhanger really left you hanging when everybody's at the X mansion. They happy that Scott and Jean has the baby, and there's a knock on the door. This is just after Storm had left. Storm decided to go, and everybody's kind of heartbroken by that. But there's a knock on the door. They assuming that Storm came back, and Morph opens the door, and it's Jean. And I know what you're saying. Like, wait, Jean was in there with the baby. Yes, it was the clone. There are clones, and she collapses in Morph's arms, and that's how the episode goes off. And so now we get into episode 3, Fire Made Flesh. And I wanted to say, I didn't say this before we started the review. It's spoilers, of course. So if you haven't seen the first season of X-Men 97, spoilers. I'm going to discuss it as if me and you were sitting down on the couch watching it together. And so you have been warned. If you don't want to be spoiled, you can stop, download this episode, go watch it, and come back to it later. And so continuing on, episode 3, Fire Made Flesh. This episode, honestly, is my least favorite. And I'm saying that begrudgingly because I loved every episode of this season. But if I had to say one was weaker, it would have been this one. Even though this one was good, it was probably the only straightforward episode. And let me explain what that means. This was like a singular story here. All the rest of the episodes, including the first 2, you have different stories going on. You have different tentacles reaching out. This episode 3 was just a singular episode, tunnel vision episode. But it's fine. That was fine. So this episode opens up with Beast doing a DNA test on the clone and Jean, and whichever one is which, and he determines that the real Jean is the one who knocked on the door. That's the one with Jean Grey's real DNA, which means that the clone is the one who had the baby, the one who's been smooching up with Scott Summers all this time for God knows how long, because nobody knows how long it's been since that clone has been there. And so we do know for a fact that the clone gave birth to Nathan Summers. And so this is something that is going to plague Scott and Jean throughout the entire season, for the rest of this season, and especially Cyclops. Scott goes through it, man. He goes through it this season. And as a fan of the comics, I never was the biggest Cyclops fan. You know what I'm saying? I always felt he was just this goody two shoes Boy Scout. I always looked at Scott Summers as Captain America with blast vision. That's what he was just a Poindexter Boy Scout. I always looked at him that way. But I do like his character. I do. But he's annoying at times. I never did really gravitate to him. I always was a Wolverine guy and a Nightcrawler guy. So I never was a big Scott Summers fan, but I did enjoy his character, and I especially enjoyed his character throughout this season, starting with this episode, and because it really went in depth with the character. I loved how they flushed out his character, what he was going through, how he's feeling about this. I mean, he was torn, and you can get feel it through his performance, how torn he was. The woman he loves, is that truly the woman he loves? But he do love her. It's like he loves them both, but which one is which? Is my life a lie? Is this whole thing a lie? What is real? He was torn. He was just conflicted out of this world. And that's a situation that I never pictured myself being in, but it made me question, what would I do in a situation like that? You know what I'm saying? And it made me feel sympathy for Cyclops. And I can proudly announce right now, I am a Cyclops fan. I am a huge fan. Episode 1 got me there. It had my attention. Now it has my curiosity. I really am invested in Cyclops. So as the episode goes on, we get a voice that's calling out to the clone of Jean Grey. And if you recognize that voice, it was, of course, Mr. Sinister, who is apparently responsible for the clone and controls her. And now she snaps and she becomes the Goblin Queen. And when she becomes the Goblin Queen, she manifests these nightmarish images and memories into the minds of all the X-Men in the mansion. It was basically, she basically sent them to hell. That's basically what she did to them. And they couldn't mess with her because she's still a clone of Jean. Jean is a beast. And so they caught the Blues trying to fight against the Goblin Queen. And so eventually the real Jean Grey wakes up out of her state, and she defeats the Goblin Queen. And we find out that this was all pretty much a distraction for Mr. Sinister to take Nathan Summers, the baby. And that was his whole goal, because Mr. Sinister's whole thing in the comics and in the show as well, he believes that Scott Summers and Jean Grey have the perfect mutant DNA. And he always wanted to combine their DNA. And what better way to combine it is for them to have a child and for him to take that child. And that was the reason for the clone. So he gets Nathan Drake, what is this, Uncharted? Nathan Summers, and he starts to infect him with that cybernetic virus. And so before he can fully infect Nathan, the X-Men show up and rescue him, and Mr. Sinister escapes, and the clone gene gives Nathan to Bishop. And Bishop tells him that, we can't fix him here. They don't have a cure for it here in this time, but maybe in the future they'll have a cure for what Mr. Sinister has done for him. So he takes him off to the future. And this really tears Cyclops apart, because he doesn't want to abandon his son like his father abandoned him. And it was heartbreaking to watch. He couldn't stay and watch him leave. And that was one thing that upset me, but I got it. I understood for the story wise, but he didn't stay. He left when right before Bishop took Nathan into the future. But that's how that little story ended. But we get a button at the end of this episode with Storm being introduced to Forge, and Forge claimed that he can restore her powers, and that's how the episode ends. This was, like I said, it was not the best out of the 10 episode, one of the best out of the 10, but it was still good. This was the weakest. And if you listen to me talk about it, you're like, really? That was the weakest? Yeah, that was the weakest. But it was definitely an exciting episode. There was a lot of action, a lot of story being told, and I did enjoy it. Episode 4, we had a split episode. This one, it was a shared episode. Motendo and Life Death Part 1. Motendo was the first part of this episode or the first half, I should say, where we get to Jubilee's 18th birthday and her wanting to celebrate her birthday at an arcade like a teenager. Let me tell you something. In 1997, coincidentally, in 1997, I also turned 18. And I can assure you, I did not want to go to an arcade. I had other things on my mind. I was trying to play something, but it wasn't an arcade game. But that's neither here nor there. But you gotta understand, Jubilee didn't have a childhood. She didn't have all the fun like we did, or at least us of a certain age around that age. But that's all she wanted to do. And Magneto was like, no, we're not doing that. We're going in a danger room. You're going to train. You're going to strengthen your abilities because there are people out here trying to kill you. There's people out here trying to kill us. If you want to see more birthdays, you need to go and train and learn to defend yourself. So that angered her. She ended up going to her room, her and Roberto, and she notices that she has a game console in her room that she didn't buy, and it's a Nintendo. And so all of a sudden it turns on and it sucks them into the game. And Nintendo is created by Mojo. Mojo is a villain that is in the comics. He was also in the original series in the 90s. He normally operates out of the television, where he gets powers from the audience reaction, from interaction with the audience is the way he gets his powers. It's hard to break down, but that's how he does it. And it was smart to kind of upgrade his character as well because of the times that we live in now, video games and stuff like that. Also cool that they designed that Nintendo like an old Nintendo 64, which I used to have back in the day. Oh boy, brought back some memories. But yes, I love the animation in this episode because it looked like the old video games that was at the arcade, the old X-Men video game at the arcade. Once again, those of us of a certain age, those 16-bit version, it was such a throwback. And it was an interesting half to this episode, and it kind of matured Jubilee. And I understood why they did it. I understood why they kind of shortened this. This didn't need to be a 30-minute long episode. It was actually perfect the way they did it. A little 12 to 15-minute half of the episode. And it was good. It was really, really good. And I loved the kind of graduation, if you will, of Jubilee from a child to a young adult here in the course of this episode. Very, very, very interesting and flushed out and done quite well. And so we get to the second half of episode 4, Life Death Part 1, where we revisit Forge and Storm, and Forge's attempt to restore Storm's powers at his ranch. And he created this machine that can restore her powers, and it doesn't work. The machine doesn't work. And we get introduced to a demon named Adversary at this ranch. And we also get a confession from Forge where he admits that he designed the technology that led to the gun being used to strip her of her powers. And so basically it was his fault. And around this, right before this is where they were kind of getting a relationship going, where they were had feelings for each other and all this here. And then boom, you drop the megaton bomb on her, and now she is broken up, and you have this demon out there who is circling and tormenting Forge and Storm to the point where Forge is poisoned by the demon, and he is pretty much down for the count. This was a very good episode. I liked how they set up this story with Storm. Once again, didn't need to have a 30-minute episode with this. This was just the right amount to have us wanting more out of this story. So I really was impressed with the way they presented this to everybody. But let's go ahead and talk about episode 5. If you've seen episode 5, you know that this is probably the episode of the season. It was the midway point of the season, and this could have been the season finale, and I would have been all right with it. I wouldn't have been all right, but it would have been. I could have understood. It was season finale quality in this episode. If you haven't seen episode 5, if you're just listening, don't care to watch the show, yeah, I'm sorry. You really dropped the ball. This was an incredible episode. The writing, the acting, the animation, the action, everything in this episode was top notch. This was what X-Men means to me. X-Men, me watching them in the 90s, reading the comic books as a kid. This is the feeling I got when I read those comics, when I watched that show, picked up and thrown back in my face in episode 5. It was just beautiful. Everything about this episode was beautiful. We pick up with Jean unable to differentiate her memories with Madeline Pryor's memories, who is the clone, by the way. I don't think I mentioned that in that episode, but it's hard for her to differentiate the memories, which one are hers and which one are Madeline's, and so she's struggling with that, and she reveals her emotional conflict to Wolverine. And while she does that, and we all know, at least I hope you do, that Wolverine is madly in love with Jean Grey. But Jean Grey loves Scott. But at the same time, we know that Jean Grey also loves Wolverine too. She has there's some love there for Wolverine. And it was shown in this episode when the two of them were talking, and Wolverine was actually the voice of reason here, telling her about her feelings for Scott and what she needs to do, and so on and so forth, saying all the right things. And Jean Grey kisses Wolverine, and immediately my jaw dropped. Immediately I thought this was the big thing in this episode. We're gonna have there's gonna be a love triangle. Well, that was quickly forgotten, to be honest with you. once the episode kept going. But we find out, or at least Jean finds out, that Cyclops, or Scott, is having how can I put it, a telepathic affair with Madeline. When she scans the memories in the mind, and she finds out that Scott is having these conversations and feelings, and they're cuddling in their minds and kissing and probably doing the boom shoom, and he's basically having an affair in his mind with Madeline, and she goes off on Scott. Now, mind you, this was 5 minutes after she just finished tonguing down Wolverine, but we gonna look past all that. But Magneto, Gambit, and Rogue are on their way to Genosha, because Genosha is in the midst of a celebration because they are becoming an actual nation recognized by the UN. And to celebrate this accomplishment, they invited Magneto back. They want Magneto to be a king of the mutants or whatever. I don't know. I forgot what the terminology that they use, but yes, they wanted him to kind of rule over Genosha and lead them to the promised land, I guess you could say. He can be the mutant Moses, if you will. But Rogue reveals to Gambit, once they get to Genosha, that she had a secret relationship with Magneto when she was younger. And Magneto is the only one that she can touch. Because in case you don't know, Rogue mutant ability is she absorbs your powers or your life force through touch, skin to skin contact. But Magneto, with his magnetism, I guess some type of, I don't know, force field, magnetism, force field, it doesn't affect him. so they can touch, and I mean touch. Wink, wink. And so, uh, with Rogue longing for this, longing for physical affection, this is very appealing to her. The only man, basically the only man in the world that she can have a physical relationship with is Magneto. And that causes kind of a love triangle between Magneto, Rogue, and Gambit. Because we know that Gambit is deeply in love with Rogue. Rogue is deeply in love with Gambit, but like I said, can't touch him. They can't have a physical relationship. They couldn't consummate their relationship. So at this gala to celebrate Genosha joining the UN, Rogue kisses Magneto and realizes that it's a mistake. She made a mistake choosing Magneto over Gambit. But before we can really get, dig our teeth into this, not Gambit, Cable shows up. Cable shows up and trying to warn people to you know get out of here to find safety, and he runs across Marilyn, who is his biological mother, and he tells her like, "You gotta leave. Am I too late? Am I too early? I think this is the wrong time or whatever." And once Madeline looks into his eyes, she sees that is Nathan. In that moment, oh my God, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it. That moment when Cable tells Madeline, "I'm sorry, Mom," and phases back into the future, it was soul crushing. That was like, oh, that was a punch to the gut because something's about to happen. And almost instantaneously, you hear bombs going off, and you look in the distance and you see Master Mold. This freakish looking Master Mold with the three heads is upgraded, and an army of Sentinels attack Genosha and just lay waste to everybody. At this point, I told myself this is what Sentinels are supposed to be. I never felt threatened at the Sentinels, in the old animated series. I never did. They always just seemed like something that was in the X-Men way. They always made easy work of them. But this was the first time that Sentinels really scared me as far as what they're going to do to the X-Men, what they're truly capable of. And boy, I mean, they were vicious as they laid waste to Genosha. Women, children, mutant, it didn't matter. They did them in. They did them in. Those Sentinels were beasts. That Master Mold was a beast. Uh Magneto struggled. He couldn't do anything with them. Everybody, they couldn't do anything with these Sentinels. And we see Gambit go full beast mode. Gambit was the only one who was doing something against those Sentinels. I mean, he was tearing them up left and right. And he knew the only way to really stop them is to stop that Master Mold. And so he manages to get close enough to him. And before he can really get to him, Master Mold stabs him through the stomach. And all of a sudden everything stopped. And it was like, oh my God, are they really gonna kill Gambit? No way. No way. There's no way. But in the most gangster sacrifice I ever seen in my life, Gambit with his last bit of strength. You see that pipe or whatever it was start to charge up, start to the Gambit charge up, and you're like, oh my God, he's about to do it, and he's charging up that that whole Master Mold, and he lifts up his head, and we get the title of this episode when Gambit says the name's Gambit, remember it, and blows up the Master Mold, which stops the rest of the Sentinels and saves everybody who is left on Genosha. Oh my God. But when you think, so Magneto is down, he's presumed dead. All these other mutants, I mean, thousands, thousands of mutants are dead. Humans as well who were there, they're dead. And at the very end of this episode, you have Rogue cradling Gambit with no gloves or nothing. She's touching him, uncontrollably crying, trying to revive him in some type of way. And as she's touching him, the episode goes off with Rogue saying, I can't feel you. I can't feel you. And it goes off. Man, let me tell y'all something. Y'all gonna laugh. Probably gonna stop listening to this episode because what a punk y'all gonna say. I cried. I cried like a 16-year-old girl. I will admit it. That got me. Oh, that got me. And to be honest with you, I cried twice because I watched this episode with, by myself, and then I went back and watched it again with my daughter because she wanted to get caught up with the show, and I cried again. And I heard her sniffling too, but I didn't want to look over there because I didn't want her to. I didn't want to draw attention to my to me cry. That was heartbreaking, man. Heartbreaking because Gambit is one of my boys, man. Gambit is from Louisiana. He's a Louisiana boy, so I always had a soft spot for Gambit. And they killed him, man. They killed off Gambit. Man, I don't know. That's the one thing about this season that I'm knocking him for. I hate it, but I get the sacrifice. But he went out like a soldier. That was, whew, that was an amazing episode. An amazing episode. We move on to episode 6, Life Death Part 2. And we needed this. We kind of needed this episode after episode 5 to kind of get us away from what was going on. But we pick up in this episode with a war between the Shi'ar and the Kree. And we find out that Shi'ar Empress is engaged to be married to Earthling, who we find out in the worst kept secret in TV show history. It turns out to be dun 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 Charles Xavier. Yes, Professor X is alive and he's on this distant planet with his new Spoogie. And Deathbird, who is the sister of the Empress, she ain't having that. She is not having that. And she doesn't accept that. And Charles has to prove himself to the Shi'ar Empire by denouncing the X-Men. And that's something that he really doesn't want to do because he looks at the X-Men as his children. You know, so there's a back and forth there. And while he's convincing this Shi'ar Empire that, you know, he doesn't have to relieve himself of the X-Men's memory, he gets a vision of Gambit's death. And that tears him apart, and he immediately decides he needs to return to Earth. And that's where we leave off with that. But the second half of this episode, we return to Forge and Storm. We remember that Forge was injured. He was poisoned by the adversary, and they had to search for this rare cactus that has the cure to this poison. And so they had to find the cave and avoid the demon adversary at the same time. And Forge lets Storm know that, you know, he can't make it to the cactus, but unfortunately it's in a tight space. And you know from the comics that Storm is claustrophobic, so that was going to be a bit of a challenge for her. And so she was willing to try it out. And so she goes in there, but while she's in this little tight quarters, and I feel her pain because I'm claustrophobic as well. While she's in this tight quarters, the adversary is, you know, playing with her mind and squeezing her in these spots. And just as it was looking grim, Storm regains her powers and defeats the adversary and retrieves the cactus and heals Forge so he can recover. But as Forge is healing, they turn on the TV and they see the attack on Genosha, and Storm is just tore up by this, witnessed what had took place on Genosha. Once again, a well-written episode. I thought it was uh, a bit of a palate cleanser from what we received in episode 5. We kind of needed a uplifting episode, and it was in a way. To see Charles Xavier is alive and he's on his way back, to see Storm regain her powers after all that took place in season not season but episode 5. Remember it. But it was a good episode. Not the greatest once again, but it was good nonetheless. Episode 7, Bright Eyes, was next up on the list, and this is where we go back to dark and gloomy because this episode begins with the funeral of Gambit, and Rogue is not present. All the X-Men are around. They're visibly upset. You have Jubilee, who is also upset, not only because of the death of Gambit, but for the absence of Rogue. Rogue is not there, but she is angrily searching for the ones responsible for Genosha, Trask and Garrett, and she is going on a spree. It was one scene where she goes search this military base, and General Thunderbolt Ross is there, and Thunderbolt Rogue is tearing up everything on the outside, and all of the soldiers are nervous on the inside, and it's kind of a bunker. And General Ross is like, "Look, why y'all tripping?" Basically, I'm paraphrasing, of course. And why y'all tripping? We built this to restrain the force of the Hulk. It ain't nothing coming through here. And just then, Rogue just go pop, just busts through, just busts through it, searching for information to where Trask and Garrett is. And so Rogue finds Garrett first in Mexico and absorbs his memory. But right before that, we get a cameo from Captain America. Yes, we get Thunderbolt Ross in this episode, as well as Captain America himself. And Rogue and Captain America have kind of a back and forth, which was interesting. Uh, Especially the part where uh, Rogue asked for the Avengers' help, and uh, Captain America was like, "Well, no, I can't do that. We can't go to. If they see Captain America bashing heads in Mexico, it's gonna cause a problem." And so she was like, "Okay, no problem." So she takes the shield, Captain America's shield, flies up and just slings it. I mean, slings it miles away. I don't know if Captain America ever found it or not. It's gonna take him a minute, but she slung with all her might and just flew off. But anyway, she goes and finds Garrett in Mexico and absorbs his memories, and almost kills him. But he is murdered, uh, a couple of scenes later, but by Bastion. But he, I mean, Rogue was not suffering fools this episode. I will tell you that. But after she gets the information she needs, she goes and finds Trask, and we jump to Roberto and Jubilee at this point in the episode, where Roberto is going to visit his mother, and he was going to tell her that he's a mutant. And so it was this was a very interesting story throughout the season with Roberto and his family, because his family is very prominent. They have money, and they have businesses and shareholders and stuff like that. So he was scared to tell his parents that he was a mutant. And this echoes what the LGBTQ community goes through when they come out. And so this was basically Roberto coming out. This was the same conversation, except gay is replaced with mutant. you know, and I thought that was very unique, very interesting, because believe it or not, X-Men, that's what X-Men are. X-Men is for the underprivileged. That's what X-Men represents, the minority, and is the perfect metaphor for these groups, including mine. And so I appreciate that. And I thought this was very interesting and unique the way they did it. And for Roberto's mother to ask him, "Oh, can you keep it a secret?" And at first she was kind of supportive, and like, oh, I always knew, I know my child, and that's really the truth. All parents know when their children are, they either they know and they don't want to know, or they know and they're just waiting on you to tell them. And that's basically what it is. But parents know their children. So she knew, but she wants him to keep it a secret because they have shareholders. And so that was very awkward for them. We return back to Rogue. She interrogates Trask and find information about the Sentinels and all this here. And Trask was about to jump off of the roof, but Rogue caught him, and he's like, "Well, look, I told you all I know," and she was like, "I know," and she just drops him. She just straight up dropped him off the roof, and all the rest of the X-Men who met up with her were there. I think it's Cyclops, Morph, uh, others. I can't remember all who was there, but I do remember Morph because he had an epic line. Like, as soon as she dropped him, Morph was like, "Oh, so that's what we doing now?" And so just then the roof blows up, well, part of the roof blows up, and Trask floats back up, and now he's possessed by this thing. And they were like, what is going on? And it come to find out he's a human sentinel hybrid. And they being the X-Men are trying to defeat this thing, and they can't. I want they're doing all that they can. Rogue gets knocked out in this battle, and it looks grim for the X-Men here. But this just then, Cable shows up and defeats Trask with a EMP, and explains that Sinister is working with a greater threat that they must stop. And this threat is the one who murdered Garrick, Bastion. And Bastion, he reveals to Sinister that Xavier is alive in space, and that Magneto is presumed dead in the Genosha attack is also alive. He's being captive by Bastion. And that's how the episode ends. Another banger of an episode. Oh man, this was just the storytelling, man. The storytelling. This show has some epic action throughout. Don't get me wrong, but the storytelling is top notch, and it only got better with our final 3 episodes of this season. Tolerance is Extinction, part 1, 2, and 3. Episodes 8, 9, and 10. Part 1, which was episode 8. This is where the UN reveals to the world that Charles Xavier is alive, which pretty much angers everybody on planet Earth, because now they feel that the X-Men has been lying to them for a year, telling the world that their leader is dead, and I guess trying to draw sympathy and all this here, only to find out it's a lie. And this has riled up a lot of anti-mutant protests outside of the school. And so Cable explains to the X-Men that the Genosha massacre was an absolute point in time that he could not change. No matter how many times he went back to try to change it, he could not change it, which we find out in episode 10, I believe. Yeah, it was the final episode where he said he went back 200 times to try to change it. 200 times, and he could not change that point in time. And so he also revealed that Bastion will try to use this to start a 300-year war that will lead to the enslavement of mutants in the human utopia. And so Cyclops, Jean, and Cable, they travel to Pennsylvania, where they think that Bastion is hid up, but they find out that it is Bastion's hometown. This is where he grew up, and that Bastion is a human machine hybrid who was conceived after his father was infected by Nimrod, a piece of Nimrod who the X-Men defeated in the original series. Can tell you which season it was, but Nimrod is from the future. But as a whole, that's a rabbit hole that I don't have time to go down today. But At this house, we meet Bastion's mother, who, in case you didn't know, and trust me, I did not know this until I looked up some stuff, but his mother was in the original series as just a throwaway character, but she was this racist waitress at this bar, and the father was like a bigot as well. And in that episode, it was just a throwaway character, and they used those two characters as the parents to Bastion, and it helped fuel his hatred towards mutants and stuff like that. I thought that was genius, genius. But we see that Bastion has turned these human Sentinel hybrids, who we call Prime Sentinels, just like Trask was, um, using that technovirus or an advanced form of it that Cable has on human beings and turning them into these sentinels. So the prime sentinels activated around the world and started attack mutants at this time and burned down the X Mansion. And so Valerie Cooper, who was on Genosha, she's a UN representative, uh, and witnessed the horrors of Genosha firsthand. She was at this. She was where at the base, I guess you could say, of Bastion, where Magneto is being held, and she releases Magneto. And so when she releases Magneto, this angers Bastion, of course, and she gives this powerful speech and says the three words that I have been saying for the longest time. Magneto was right. And Magneto, after escaping, uh, flies up to the North Pole at the axis, the little Earth Atlas or whatever, and does his thing and says enough, and does this magnetism thing that affects the Earth because he's at the Earth Atlas or whatever, and basically shuts down the planet and shuts down just this giant EMP that shuts down all electrical devices around the world, including the Sentinels. And so we go back to the X Mansion and we see that Wolverine fears that Magneto has declared war on planet Earth. And just then he asks, where's the professor when you need him? And a spaceship crashed in the middle of the mansion. And when the door opened up, it was Professor X, and he summons the X-Men, and the episode ends. Uh, Great kickoff to this finale, in this three-part finale. I was like, man, this is crazy. Magneto shut down the planet. If you don't think Magneto is super powerful, I don't know what to tell you. This dude, Magneto is a beast. He is a beast. And so we move on to episode 9, part 2 of Tolerance is Extinction. And Professor X is met with not so happy cheers. There weren't any parades, balloons, and fireworks going off at his arrival. Everybody is kind of distrusting of old Charles in, in his return. But the X-Men at this point, they're really not focused on that. They're focused on stopping Bash and convincing Magneto to reverse the blackout. And so Magneto reestablished his mutant haven, Asteroid M, and chooses to leave Earth without power and without anything. He's like, I'm gone, I'm out. But before he goes to orbit, he goes back to the X Mansion and what's left of it, and invites the X-Men to come with him after a back and forth between him and Charles. And Rogue and Sunspot go with him because Sunspot, or Roberto, he feels there's nothing for him on Earth. His mother turned him in to the Prime Sentinels or whatever, and they want him to hide his secret, hide who he is and whatnot. And he's fed up. He had enough. So he decides to join. Rogue is tired. Rogue is like, look, and she had a cool speech as well, where she's like, look, Jean Grey. Well, I'm not gonna watch any of you die no more. I watched my man die. I'm not watching any more of you die. Jean Grey, Jean has died countless times. Morph, he died. He wasn't even 30 minutes before he joined the team, and y'all kicked him to the curb. And that was a shot. That was a shot at the original animated series where Morph died in the first episode, and or presumed dead, but he came back later. But yeah, she was just fed up, and you could tell she's at her wicks end. You know, she's done so much, and the man that she loved is gone. He sacrificed himself for this, you know. So she left with him. So those were the two that left, and so the rest of the X-Men, they decide that they're going to split into two teams. The first team is going to go after Bastion. The second team is going to go after Magneto. And they figured this was a good time because the Sentinels can't do anything at this point with the blackout. But we find out that Bastion is a technopath, which means he can communicate with technology. So he can still control this Prime Sentinel. So while the first team go to attack, they are attacked by Sentinels. And they weren't expecting that. And Forge and Beast had created this collar that can dampen the powers of mutants, you know, pretty much the same thing that was used on them by the anti-mutant militias and stuff like that. But their goal is to get that collar around Bastion. And so they're fighting against them. You have Jean Grey going up against Mr. Sinister, and Mr. Sinister is just toying with her emotionally, telling her, "Look, I'm the only person who can tell you where you begin and Madeline ends. I can let you know when I made the switch." And Jean was like, I didn't care less. And they go at it, even though they fight into a bowling alley where Jean telepathically hits Mr. Sinister with about 50 bowling balls, man. I mean, just tearing them up. And Cable shows up. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Cable is under the control of Sinister, and he's fighting against Jean, and Jean was able to disarm him. But Cable reveals that, look, my mother was a powerful telepath, and I have that ability too. So he hits her with the telepathic thing, and she's struggling, boy. I mean, she's about to go out. She's about to die, be killed by her quote unquote son. Now, back on Asteroid M, we got the second team going up against Magneto. And if the, Charles Xavier is being Charles Xavier, trying to convince Magneto to reverse what he did. You know, what you're doing is going to destroy the Earth, which it is. They have less than an hour to reverse what Magneto did, and Magneto ain't having it. He's like, I don't care. You know, I don't care. Let them die. Let them all die. You know, so they have no choice, no other choice but to fight. They have to try to beat it out of them. And Charles tells Scott, like, look, you have to get him to the point where I can take over his mind and control him. You know, that's the only way to stop it. I gotta control his mind. I gotta take over his mind, which is pretty much a no-no, but he left him no choice. And so right before that happens, well, Scott does do it, but right after he did that, Jean calls out to Scott and telepathically transports him to where she is being attacked by Nathan. And Scott is like, he's helpless. He can't do anything. And he has to witness this again. Jean die again. And right before the power overtakes her, Cable's power overtakes her, she tells him, I love you. And he flashes back to Asteroid M. And he has no idea what happened. We don't know what happened. And just as Charles is about to take over Magneto's mind, Scott blasts Charles' chair. to kind of break the link. And he's like, no, they need more time. The other team needs more time because he's thinking about Gene. So Magneto goes ham now. Now he is tearing, he is he is ripping the metal around the in that little whatever throne room that he's in apart, and he's subduing everybody. He puts his helmet onto Charles's head and begins to crush the helmet while it's on Charles's head. I mean, he was tearing him up. He was about to kill Charles. And just then we hear the sniff, and the three claws burst out of Magneto's torso, and Wolverine sneaks up behind him and stabs him. And I immediately gasped. I had a lump in my throat, like, man, they're gonna kill Magneto now. I was really hurt, and he's the quote unquote villain, but I was hurt because I like Magneto. I'm a Magneto guy. Sue me. I don't know what to tell you. And so I was like, oh man, Wolverine finally got him. But just then, Wolverine's claws retract without him. He didn't retract them. And Magneto told him, it's over. This war is finally over. And just then you see Wolverine just kind of be still. And I'm like, wait, they're about to do this? They're really about to do this? And you see the veins begin to pop out of Wolverine. And Charles is screaming for Magneto to stop. Please don't do this. Don't do this. And you hear Wolverine screaming in pain. And just then we see the exact same panel that we saw in the comic book from this very same instance, where Magneto pulls the adamantium out of Wolverine in a brutal fashion. I was like, oh man. And that's how the episode goes on. Once I was like, oh man, this show went there. Yes, I seen it in the comics, but I didn't think they were actually going to do this on the show. It really caught me off guard. It truly caught me off guard. This show up to this point was like so brutal, and some of the actions that took place throughout this season that really left your jaw wide open. And this was the biggest one up to this point. And so that leads us to the final episode of this season, episode 10, part 3 of Tolerance is Extinction. And we pick up with Wolverine critically hurt. I mean, he had the adamantium ripped out of Xavier. He was able to take control of Magneto after that. And so he restores the power to Earth and reverses the blackout that Magneto had done. But this was to the detriment of everybody on Earth, because now the Prime Sentinels are back online. And so Jean connects with the solar power. She comes back as the Phoenix. And she had died. Our fears were realized. Cable did kill her. But she returned as the Phoenix, and she was able to place the collar on Bastion and sever the telepathic link that he had with the Prime Sentinel. So they were able to subdue Bastion at that point. And we also see that Magneto and Charles' minds are blended in a way. They're both knocked out in reality, but inside of Magneto's mind, we have Charles, who's trying to reach Magneto to wake him up, so to speak. And so you have that little conflict going on in Magneto's mind after Charles had pretty much broke his mind. We had an interesting little scene. And I say interesting because I've never seen this before. It's probably been in comics, but I didn't read an issue with this. While Wolverine is on the table trying to recover from what happened to him, you have Scott bend over and tell him that, look, don't you give up. You do what you do best. You heal. Do it for her. And he takes Wolverine takes a breath. He's kind of trying to gain back his strength to heal. And I found that fascinating that Scott, despite all that's going on, despite this being his wife now, we're talking about his wife, but he has enough respect and love for Wolverine, knowing that Wolverine in an instant will probably sniff him in the back as well. Uh, Wants him to hold on, wants him to live, and tells him, hold on for her. I'm like, man, that is fire. I don't know if that was in an issue of the comics anywhere. It's been adapted or whatever, or it was done in a different way. If it is, let me know. But this was my first time experiencing it, and I thought it was fantastic. I just love that line. It really touched me. It really it touched me. But we returned back to where the Phoenix had defeated Bastion, and the Phoenix Force leaves Jean, and Jean is back, and her and Storm embrace and whatnot. But Bastion comes back. This is after the Phoenix Force pretty much scripts Mr. Sinister of all the DNA of mutants that he had took, um, and reducing him to this old shriveled up person. And so uh, Bastion returns and just beats Cable down. He rips the metal arm off of Cable and begins to beat him with his own arm. But he takes that arm and kind of molds with it and create this new armored suit type situation. And he goes and flies off to space to asteroid M, where he's going to destroy it and have it hurl back to Earth, where it would have destroyed Earth. And so on his way up there, we have Rogue meet up with him. And bruh, when Rogue when Rogue first went at Bastion and said his name is Gambit, remember it, and went to work on Bastion, Rogue went beast mode. And the first thing that ran across my mind, those live action movies where Anna Paquin played Rogue was such an abomination. It was so horrible what they did Rogue in those live action films. And this showed how much of a beast Rogue is. Actually, this whole season showed how much of a beast she was. But this episode here, when she just went to work on Bastion, and Bastion, he had he got the blues, man. It was tough to overcome Rogue, but he eventually did. Sunspot showed up, and he did a little something and kind of redeemed himself for joining forces with Magneto, him and Rogue, nonetheless. I thought that was pretty interesting as well, that the two X-Men that quote unquote abandoned their family were the ones who was fighting off Bastion. Was pretty cool. I failed to mention that we got a lot of cameos in this episode, a lot of cameos, and I thought it was cool because the big question was, where were the Avengers when all this was going on? We have world-ending events that are taking place, and we haven't seen any Avengers. That we did see Captain America in previous episodes, but that was it. And so, where were the rest of the Avengers? I think we saw Spider-Man as well in a previous episode, but where is everybody? Because that kind of takes the allure away from the Marvel universe. If you don't have any other Marvel characters to interact in this world-ending event, well, we got it here. We got Captain America. We got Iron Man. We got Daredevil. Also, Cloak and Dagger. Cloak and Dagger showed up in this episode. You also had Black Panther, people. Yes, Black Panther showed up. Not T'Challa, but T'Chaka. He showed up in this episode. You also had, who else was there? Doctor Strange showed up. Just little cameos. They weren't fighting alongside the Avengers and whatnot. I mean, the X-Men, but they just showed up to let you know that this is a world event, to let you know that they are around, that they are interacting with what's going on. And that was perfectly done to really answer the question: is there anyone else in the Marvel universe involved in this story? And yes, it is. It's all connected, and I thought that was great. Needless to say, the X-Men did eventually overcome uh Bastion, but this was only after the president sent missiles to shoot down the asteroid M, which was not a good idea because it was going to crash the Earth. And so just then Magneto, he regains consciousness after a conversation with Charles in his mind. He was able to break through. He regains consciousness and stops the android M from crashing into the planet. But just as he saved the asteroid and Earth, all of a sudden there was an explosion in space. It was the asteroid was gone. The X-Men were gone, and they're all presumed dead. So what happened? you know, and so we flash forward 6 months later, and Forge is trying to find out what happened. He's researching, and Bishop shows up, and Bishop informs Forge that the X-Men are trapped in time, and that they're not dead. They're trapped in different times. And so we find out that Cyclops and Jean are in 3960 AD in this dystopian future, and they're confronted by Mother Ascana, who is Rachel Summers, and she is the daughter of the future Scott Summers and Jean Grey. It's a whole thing. Don't even trip. It's a yeah, that's deep comic lore, but that is their daughter. And young Nathan comes out of one of those huts or tents or whatever as well. And so it now is like, what is going on here? Then we flash to Rogue and Nightcrawler, Magneto, Professor X, Beast as well. They're in ancient Egypt in 3000 BC. And so they are on polar opposites of time. And in 3000 BC, those group of X-Men are confronted by the young version of Apocalypse. And the episode ends, the season ends at that point. We get a post-credit scene where we go to the present on Genosha, and we see that Apocalypse is also in the present in his adult form. And now the season officially ends. This was amazing. This was an awesome season of television. I cannot express how enjoyable it was to watch this show. This show had great writing, great animation. The animation style was similar to the 90s cartoon or animated series, I should say. Very similar, but updated, very cleaner version. The action was great. The social commentary was on point. I think this was tour de force in animation. It didn't pull any punches at all, no pun intended. It was very brutal, but it wasn't brutal for brutal's sake. I know a lot of people have problems with Invincible, the animated show that's on Prime Video, how bloody and brutal it is, and may consider it to be overkill with the blood and the violence. But I'm not in that camp, but I can see where people would say that. But this was not for that sake. It wasn't for shock value. It was really to move the story along, and I think it did an excellent job in doing so. X-Men 97, which is currently on Disney Plus, gets a letter grade of an A plus. This was epic television in every sense of the word. All 10 episodes are excellent. Even the slower ones, like I said, episode 3 was not my favorite, but I enjoyed it a lot. It wasn't horrible, but when put up against the remaining 9 episodes in this season, it was the slowest. But if it was in a different season, it would probably be one of the best. It's just the luck of the draw. But I enjoyed every single episode. Every week I was on the edge of my seat. I was just anticipating a new episode every Wednesday when it dropped. I love this show. And I'm praying that they can keep this momentum going, that season 2 will be just as exciting, just as rich in storytelling as the first. And so I want to revisit the question I asked at the beginning of this episode. Is Marvel back? Did X-Men 97 save Marvel? I don't know. I still don't know quite yet. I'm not ready to jump fully back on board with the MCU. This was a nice step, but this isn't technically the MCU. But as far as the Marvel brand is concerned, yeah, it helped because there was a lot of doubt there. There was a lot of doubt with the live action, and that's what's really affected. Marvel on television hasn't been that bad. Uh, well, I take that back. There has been some bad shows that they've released as well. Well, not bad, but just didn't live up to expectations. But the film side of Marvel is what's hurting. And so I wouldn't say that Marvel is back until we see a film that takes the source material as serious as X-Men 97 did. Now, is there hope in a horizon? Sure, it is. There is hope as far as the film side. Is it? We have Deadpool and Wolverine, which is coincidentally a quasi X-Men film. Will this save Marvel? Will Deadpool be Marvel Jesus? We have to wait and see. All signs point to it being a good film. The prayer is it is going to be a good film. I think that it has all the qualities you need to make it a good film, to save Marvel. Because just looking back in the past releases of Marvel films, Captain Marvel was a dud. With the exception of Guardians of the Galaxy 3, nothing else worked, nothing else did. I mean, Thor Love and Thunder Love and Thunder wasn't well received. The Multiverse of Madness, Doctor Strange wasn't well received. It just has not hit. Then you have films like Captain America Brave New World, which was supposed to come out this year, but they pushed it back to next year because of extensive reshoots. They redoing the ending of the film. They rewrote a lot of parts. I think more than half of that film, and reshot more than half of that film because it didn't work. There's the Fantastic Four. There's a lot of doubt there, but I think that's because of the past attempts at Fantastic Four films. None of them worked. And so there's a lot of doubt surrounding that. Blade, we've been promised a Blade film with Mahershala Ali for it feels like 10 years. I don't know how long it's been, but my God, would that movie ever come out? It's supposed to come out next year. I'm not putting any money on it. It's a lot of questions going forward. And the Thunderbolts as well, So we shall see. But as it stands right now, I'm planting my flag with X-Men 97. Great show. This is something Marvel needed. As far as Marvel, the brand, they needed this. They did need this. But will it is it enough to save Marvel? The jury's out. Until they put out a good film, I can't say that. But this is a step in the right direction. I would like to know, what did you feel, or how did you feel about X-Men 97? And were you a fan of the original series from 1992 to 97? And do you think it lived up to the hype? Do you think it was better than all that? I want to know all your thoughts. I really do. It to me, this was an exciting show. Uh, it took the original and turned it up to 11 for me. But more importantly, I want to know, how about you? Email the show, kbradiopodcast@gmail.com. You could also search for the KB Radio Network on all social media platforms. You can also subscribe to the KB Radio Network channel on YouTube and like this video if you don't mind. Also, don't forget about the 5 stars, the reviews, and sharing this show on all of your social media platforms. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, wherever you are currently listening to movie goodness here on the KB Radio Network. Everybody, thank you for joining me for this deluxe edition, because I wasn't expecting to talk this long, but it is what it is. I really love this show. Can't wait for season 2 whenever it drops on Disney Plus. Want you all to know that I love you. Continue to love everyone, and until we speak again, you all be blessed.